Welcome to Chapter 1, Digital Crime and Digital Terrorism. Chapter 1 is an introduction and an overview to this book. It's also an introduction and overview to the course, CYB 673. So let's jump right on in. So things you should have accomplished by the end of this slide presentation is basically describe the issues, trends, problems of digital crime and digital terrorism, understand the estimates on the costs of cybercrime, and also understand the intended audience, purpose, and scope of this text. Discuss development perspective and the problem and changes to cyber victimization, and describe the scheme for classifying computer crimes. Okay, these are some pretty broad objectives, and most of these things we're going to cover in much greater detail as we go through the course. So, first of all, new threats to information age. I think everybody realizes that the computer is not going anywhere. We are seeing computers being basically put into everything that we're doing in our life. Everything from our phones, iPhones, Android, all the way through to online refrigerators and online dishwashers and online washing machines. There's all kinds of things that we now have online that you probably never would have thought would have been possible. The online toaster, for example, prints out your daily weather on your piece of bread before you butter it. So the more and more we move through things, the more and more you're going to see the computer and digital technology becoming a part of our life. And if you start kind of thinking through and maybe apply some of that future thinking, you might think of driverless cars and how someone may someday figure a way out of running somebody over with a digital car and committing a murder with a driverless car, something such as that. There's a fear and there's a threat of cybercrime, and it is a real threat. If you think about it, our biggest Achilles heel in the United States is our information structure. It's something that was designed not to be secure. It was designed to be something that allowed communication. It was never designed to sell cars and widgets and all the things that we do with it today. It was simply a mechanism of communicating between simple nodes on a very simple network back in the 1950s. So we've elevated the use of our infrastructure, but we really haven't changed the infrastructure. So there are definite holes, weaknesses, and threats that are created by the use of this type of topology. Some of the new threats you're going to see, obviously, distribution of child pornography. I remember early on as an investigator in 1994, when the internet first came out, child pornography at that point, we were investigating child pornography that was being delivered by UPS and the mail service, and packages would show up and they would transfer pictures, and you'd follow the little guy in his brown uniform, and when he delivered a package, you arrest the guy for getting child pornography. Well, along comes the internet, and you no longer need a person to deliver your information. Now you can send it directly across. And funny thing is, when we started out the internet in 1994, I remember the first 4 websites that you could go to. I remember us going across those 4 websites and finding it mildly interesting and thinking, wow, this is kind of cool, but really not sure what everybody's going to start doing with it. And if we'd only known, I would have invested in Apple that day. Been a millionaire today. But distribution of child pornography and things like that, it's a cottage industry. It makes billions of dollars a year for people that are doing it. And it exploded out into the web. Exploitation, stalking, and identity theft. These are all things that basically come from the traditional side. It really hasn't changed. In fact, all 4 of these categories really haven't changed, but the medium that is being used to send the information has changed, and that's the difference. So we have our terms here. We've got prefix of cyber, so you can throw cyber on the front of everything. Cyber forensics and cyber investigations, and cyber has become kind of a catchword for many things, and you're starting to see people kind of hone down a little bit, kind of like we used to have a doctor, an MD, and the MD was responsible for everything. Well, we used to have a technologist, and the technologist was responsible for everything. And now we have multi-levels of technologists. So you have your networking guy, and you have your client-side guy, and you have your guy that works on the computers, and your application person. So much like the medical industry, you're seeing how these or this term is being diffused amongst all the different kind of modes of crime, or especially the spectrum of digital crime. We have digital crime, digital terrorism, and then separately we have malware. So we have different segments, and if we put cyber in front of those, we have cyber crime, cyber terrorism, and cyber malware. These are all things that we see as investigators increasing. So again, cyber, it's nothing more than adding the technology component to crime, basically. So as we start looking at the complications of cybercrime, the problem is you have such a rapid growth of this industry of cybercrime or digital crime, digital terrorism, and you don't have enough investigators, law enforcement, to really keep up with it. In fact, there was a study done by the FBI a few years ago that stated that less than 1% of all law enforcement are trained to be involved in a cyber investigation. And if you think about kind of that staggering statistic, less than 1% of people are trained to do something that pretty much is in everybody's life. So we are, as investigators, as law enforcement, and people in the computer crime community, and I've been doing computer crime since 1990. Started out with fraud, going through and doing transactional database investigations, looking at contractor fraud, all that kind of stuff. Through the 90s, when the internet kind of came out, then we went to pager forensics and cell phone forensics, and we moved through all the different modalities of the different types of forensics. And it just is, every time you turn around, it's something new. There's something new on the horizon. Holographic cyber investigations are now being talked about. How do we investigate the holographic video chats that are going to be going on? And there's a significant inconsistency in defining computer crime offenses. When computer crimes first started out, I remember in 1993, when they first kind of were playing with the computer crime in 92, 93, we had something called fax law. You get the fax machines, and the mindset was, well, we'll just take the word fax out, we'll throw a computer in there, and now you have a new law, and that law will cover computer crime. And obviously that didn't work. So we have a legal system that doesn't quite understand computer offenses and computer crimes. We don't have a legal system that quite identifies it the way it should be. So we don't have laws that are written correctly. And another thing too is people look at it as a white collar crime. Who's really being hurt? Was there really a victim here? So someone lost some money. Yeah, it's a fraud. There was no gun pulled, etc. So there's the lack of social outrage as you look at these cyber crimes. Systematic data collection. DOJ has done a great job of putting out guidelines and procedures, but if you go from state to state, everybody has a different interpretation of cybercrime. Everybody has a different interpretation of how you should collect, what you need to collect. And a great example of that is cell phones. If you go from California to Georgia, you basically have two different laws that cover the ability for an investigator to look at the cell phone. What type of search is valid and what type of search is not valid. So just in that one little technology, we have a bunch of different laws, and each state and each area has become a little segmented or fragmented on how they exploit or collect. Now, the computer itself, over the years, has really come to a point where there's very clear guidance on how you extract data from a computer, what type of file you use, how do you seize the computer. How does law enforcement collect and track that computer? All that kind of stuff is pretty clear when you're looking at it from the overall Department of Justice or from most procedural perspectives. And then offenses, they vary greatly in character. If I'm doing a child pornography investigation, I really don't need to be a technologist. I just need to know what to look for imagery. I can go through someone's computer and I can find child pornography pretty quickly. Take that in comparison to somebody that's doing hacking. So we were in Estonia uh, 2 months ago, and I was part of Operation Cross Shields. And in Operation Cross Shields, we were looking at the manipulation of the network for financial gain, and it was a very intricate gameplay that took on. The same investigator that investigates child pornography may not have a clue on how to investigate this greater crime or this other type of crime. So again, the offenses, they vary greatly. And again, we throw the word cyber in front of it and boom, it becomes something that the computer crime guy should be able to figure out. And you'll find that sometimes they just don't have the understanding or the technical knowledge to be able to understand or collect information correctly. Much has changed since computers were first introduced. I go back to 1994, actually even before 94, before the computers come up, we were investigating computers that were, X-based processors, 286 with 32 kilobytes of RAM memory, 2 floppy disks, 5 1/4 inch floppy disks, and that's what we worked with. You know, we've seen that change to what we have today, which is just mind-blowing. If you think about how quickly we have progressed in 20 and 30 years with our computer technology, and it's just getting better and worse for the investigator, because the data storage containers that you're talking about, I mean, you're actually talking about potentially petabytes of information that may be available to uh, be collected. And when you talk about structures such as that, petabytes of information, there's you just don't have the tools sometimes available to go through that kind of data. You certainly aren't going to do the investigation the same way that we did it back in the very beginning, where we took a floppy disk, threw it in, we started out at 001 on the first cluster and or sector, and we went through and we looked at every bit of data on that floppy disk. Good luck doing that today with a petabyte of information. It's just not going to happen. So we have to have tools. We have to have machinery that goes through, and a lot of our processing and a lot of our understanding of the device comes from that new use of technology and things today. Um, and again, a lot of things have changed. You look back to the cuckoo's egg. Good little, I have that paperback and Takedown, and some of the books written back in the day. You look at Captain Crunch, and you look at some of the original hackers, some of the old guard hackers, the Mitnicks, and people from the past. And you notice that when we start talking about computer crime, a lot of people focus on the mechanics and the techniques of the computer crime, and they don't really look at the offenders, and we start losing ourselves in the technology. And a lot of juries get bogged down with a lack of understanding of what we're talking about as cyber investigators sometimes, because we spend so much time explaining the technology that we forget about the crime. And that's something that we have to be really careful of. That we understand our offenders, we understand the offenses, we understand you talk about digital terrorism. Why is digital terrorism digital terrorism? What makes it digital terrorism? Sure, it's got the computer component, but what about the cell itself? Who makes up the cell, and what kind of people go to that cell, and what would you be looking for as an investigator going into a house that would lead you to the belief that someone would be using a computer technology as a collaborative environment for terrorism, things such as that. So we have to look at, again, the offenses and how the offenses are committed when you're looking at these crimes. Um, and again, going back to what we talked about in the very beginning, we're not decreasing our use of computers in any way. If nothing else, we're increasing the use of computers every single day. We're finding something new to put into it, and we're having a greater availability of technical information to be able to create things that would hurt the computers. For example, there are websites now where you can go and plug it in a couple things, and it will write a virus for you, and then you put that virus on to someone else's computer. And again, if you took someone's Facebook away, or imagine your children, if you have children, if you took away their Facebook for a day, or took away your email for a day, or if you're a BlackBerry person and I took away your BlackBerry RIM connection for a day, or if you're an Android person, took away, your ability to get email and text messages, or iMessages on your iPhone and things such as that. If I took that stuff away from you, how would you feel after 2-3 days? Well, obviously you would be victimized. You would feel victimized that you were being held away from that great amount of information that's being posted. You certainly would know if when Aunt Sally had her tooth out, and when little Bobby was sick in Kansas, and all those important things that you have to know about in your day, especially if you're on the social media side of it. So using, especially for digital terrorists, taking away technology from people is a great way of terrorizing a small a population by a small group of people, which is what terrorism is all about. Very few affecting, the masses. So who possesses the greatest threat, the insider or the outsider? Your insider threat is always going to be your greatest threat or greatest threat. The outsider, they still have to get through all the technology that's in place, the firewalls. They have to get past the security. They have to, find ways to get in. The insider, though, the insider's on the inside. The insider has access behind some of your firewalls. The insider has connection streams beyond what the outsider would be allowed to get, and therefore the insider becomes a much greater threat to you, especially if you're going to be working in the security industry. You're going to find that you have a greater responsibility to protect your threats from the inside, your users, etc. And then we have, again, the outsiders. The outsiders are just that. They're not trusted where insiders are. Outsiders have to negotiate your firewalls. They have to find, break through your DMZs and get inside your networks and, figure a way through, which is, probably a little bit more daunting than being able to just, log in at the corporate computer, which you're already trusted on. So the insider threat is always one of your greatest threats. So when we talk about the dynamics of processing, the digital crime or terrorism, they're both basically the same. Digital crime and digital terrorism, they are virtually the same thing. The rise of digital terrorism, again, it's a crime. A lot of people argue that terrorism and crime are basically the same, the same kind of thing. It's a use of technology to commit something that's going to hurt someone else or victimize someone else. But there is a slant to terror or digital terrorism that is not the same as in crime, and that comes back to your intent. What should the intent of the criminal act? And that goes back to understanding the offense and understanding the person. So we start seeing, some bridges that we're starting to build here in the understanding of how digital crime and digital terrorism affect our population. So in digital terrorism, my end state might not be to take money away from you. My end state might just be or to create fear in the population. For example, taking down the internet for a day, taking your power away for a day, things such as that would cause you to have a fear or not trust, the technology that you have. And again, just like with computer crime, the rise of digital terrorism, it's a huge issue. It's something that, so I was telling you, as part of Cross Shields, we spent 5 days in an exercise simulating a Russian incursion on NATO networks, and it's pretty scary what could be done, and some of the things that are available to the person that really wants to cause a kind of a fear within a population or do a terrorist act. And I would recommend you read a book by Richard Clarke. It's I can't think of the name. It's Cyber War is the name of it, and he does a really good job of explaining some of the things that are vulnerable through the network, which are used against countries, the political state attacking another political state using the technology. Um, and the National Infrastructure Protection Center absolutely is talking about how there are digital crime and digital terrorism. They're on parallel tracks, but I will also tell you that the use of digital terrorism also uh, is used along with an actual attack that happens on the street. So someone planning a cyber attack, doing some type of hostile action within your borders may use the digital side of it to cause confusion or delay response times. So they may use a combination or use this hybrid warfare model to create a challenge for law enforcement or any type of response force from getting to you and stopping stopping the crime or the attack from happening. So the digital or use of the digital network is very, very useful to anybody that is a smaller entity fighting a larger entity, things like that. Because at the end of the day, the network makes everyone kind of even. As long as you have a computer and bandwidth the same as your competitor or the person that you're going against, you're on an even scale. Saddam Hussein, in Iraq, prior to his oust, stated that everyone needed to understand how to use technology against the United States because the United States' Achilles heel was its reliance on information technology, and that's something that we need to take very seriously. Um, oh, this is it's a hard one to look at because trying to estimate the cost of cybercrime is really, really difficult. And the reason it's is because a lot of people don't want to tell you that they were hacked. They don't want to tell you that they were a part of a cybercrime instance, especially banks and financial institutions. They don't want anybody to know that they were a part of a hack. And there are plenty of laws out on the books now that force or make financial institutions report computer crime, but they still tend not to report, severities of the attacks, severities of loss, things such as that. When credit cards are stolen or um, monies are taken out, Bank America and Wells Fargo, Chase, all these banks, they don't want people to know that they're not a secure institution. They don't want people to feel like their money is not well protected. So a lot of times it will go unreported. In many instances, people will get their golden parachute based out of, they stole X amount of money, and instead of the company going live and saying, hey, look, this is what happened, they'd rather just eat the, $100,000, $200,000 worth of lost monies and let the employee go, tell them to never come back, and this is your golden parachute, and, we don't want to hear anything more about it. You may think that's crazy, but $100,000 to pay an employee may save them $10, $15 million in lost profits that they would lose if someone was to believe that they were not as secure as they purport, especially agencies or banks and things such as that. FDLE, the Federal Department of Law Enforcement, they did a survey. 403 respondents, 25% reported they've been victimized by computer crime. Embezzlement of funds by employees was a major resource or source of crime, excuse me. And as you can probably look at that and go, that doesn't even make sense. And it doesn't, because again, a lot of people want to say, what actually was done. A lot of companies just underreport these crimes. A lot of companies don't keep track of these crimes. A lot of companies will give internal reporting, but they'll never post that to an external source. So a computer crime is really, really hard. Anderson and colleagues, they conducted the first systematic study of costs of cybercrime. Costs were associated with different categories of cybercrime, and traditional crimes that are now cyber because they're conducted online, as opposed to traditional crimes have changed with the advent of the internet. So what they did is they went out and they looked at the new cybercrime, malware, hacking, um, things such as that, and they compared them to the transitional crimes that have changed with the advent of the internet. Which so when you're looking at child pornography and you're looking at things such as that, which are transitioning, and we're getting into new mediums of child exploitation. Um, some of the new mechanisms of fraud and some of the new ways that people are frauding or using it to launder their money online, things such as that. With the advent of the internet, things came that we couldn't do before. For example, when I want to launder money, I can now launder money online instead of having to go to different banks or different convenience stores and things like that to get rid of my money. I can go into a gambling institution or a gambling room on a website, set myself up as the same four players, gamble against myself and lose to myself, transferring money from one account to another account, basically laundering money. So there's a bunch of unique ways that people have used the internet to continue doing computer or continue doing crime. They're just changing the way they do it. New crimes are originated since the advent of the internet, and crimes that facilitate other crimes through the misuse of the computer. These are all different things or ways that people have taken the technology. Crimes that facilitate other crimes through the misuse of computer. So if you're using servers, and if you're using other items on the internet as your host, these are ways that you can use the equipment that's out there that isn't protected correctly, for example, that would allow you to manipulate or cause harm on the network itself. And then new crimes that originated since the advent of the internet. There were crimes out there that never could have been done without the speed of the internet. You look at some of your Ponzi schemes, you go, well, they send a letter out, and then you get one letter here, and now you're sending a million emails at a time, and it costs you absolutely nothing. Where at least before, if they sent you a letter, it cost them the postage to send it out. It was a little bit more expensive, and that actually prevented a lot of people from doing kind of Ponzi schemes using the letters. Now we've moved into the internet. I can send out a million letters, and it costs me absolutely nothing. And I can do that, every hour. I can do that daily. Whatever it is that I want to do until my IP or my domain name becomes compromised, and I get blacklisted, and then my mail doesn't go anywhere anymore. Excuse me. Other crimes that have come from the advent of the internet would come from the collaboration sites, sharing of data that are in data farms or server farms that are on the web. People going in and stealing information from these server farms that you wouldn't have access to without the advent of the internet, or the ability to communicate or do those, the Facebook stalkings and cyberbullying and things such as that they start out cyber, bullying as bullying, but it moves into a much larger venue when I can now remotely access people that I don't even know, and I can bully them, or I can create fictitious characters that bully someone that they don't even know. So it's interesting to see how computer crimes have changed, and also some of the new crimes that have come from just having computers that you could not do without having the computer present. There's basically four classifications of computers. These are very old and long in the tooth, and they came out in, I would say the first time I saw these was in 1997, 98 time frame. There were some good books on computer crime investigation that came out in those days. A gentleman by the name of Cohen was very inspirational in in putting a lot of this stuff together. And a lot of these guys that I knew of from the inception of kind of the computer crime investigators, they put together this list, and they kind of broke it down into four basic categories. The computer is a target, the computer is an instrument, the computer is incidental, And then just crimes associated with the prevalence of computers. We're going to go through these just real quick. Um, the crime where a computer is a target. Basically, this is where I'm going after. Crimes, the target in itself is the computer that I'm going after. I'm going after this computer. Examples include data alteration, network intrusion, computer vandalism. These are all things where I'm going after. When you're talking about vandalism, you're talking about malware, you're talking about me putting something onto your computer, and I'm going after a specific thing. So I might be coming after you so I can steal your credit cards, or I may steal, from your servers, or I may steal identities. There is a specific thing that I want. I might get an email server because I'm looking for specific things on email. For example, what happened during the election. The hackers hacked an email server, and they released documents from one of the candidates into the wild to let everybody see what it is. The target of that intrusion was the computer that housed those documents, and that's what they were looking for. When the computer is used as an instrument of the crime, the computer is used to gain some other criminal objective. In other words, I'm using it as a thing for my theft, my fraud, threats and harassment, bullying. The computer itself is not actually what I'm going after. I'm going onto the web using the computer, and it allows me to interact with Facebook. It allows me to interact with people, send emails, send harassing, text messages, things such as that. So the instrument of the crime, and without that instrument, you wouldn't have that crime. And that's really important to understand, that there are some crimes that if I can't prove that you had technology, you couldn't commit the crime. For example, if I send a death threat to you by email, you're going to have to prove, or you're going to have to draw a connection trail back to me to show that the biology and the technology work together to commit that crime. If you can't bridge your technology to your biology, if you can't show that there's an association between me and technology, you're not going to prove your case. So you have to show that I use that computer as a instrument, or I had the ability to communicate with that computer with someone else, because me sending an email can't happen. It's not possible. Me using a computer to send email, now I can. So again, I have the instrument crime. The computer facilitates a crime, such as money laundering, criminal enterprise, child pornography, luring victims. So here I put a tool out, or I have a trap out, or I have some enterprise environment where we can send our money. We can use the servers to traffic pictures from one server to another. I can put a Facebook page up there that, without my attention, sits there and lures or brings children in that want to be my friends, for example, on Facebook, because I have a really cool Facebook page. Or I put up, Uncle, Tommy's playground website, and I offer free games on my website, and the whole purpose is to lure children into my website so that I can then use that against them later on. I can lure, victimize them, or find out where they live, and do other things. So again, in this instant where the computer is incidental to the crime, the computer is not actually the tool that I'm using, because I'm using another tool to access the web. But once I put something out onto the web, or once I put it onto the computers, it now kind of takes on a life of its own. It becomes its own entity that is a part of my crime. It's incidental. It's not actually the perpetrator, but it's a part of my crime, and without it, I couldn't commit the crime. And then crimes associated with the prevalence of computers. Okay. There are, like it says right here, there's people out there that try to avoid technology, and even those types of people can be victims of computer crime. Anytime you fill out an insurance paper, anytime you fill out a bank account statement, a bank line application, or anytime you do basically any paperwork anymore, it's probably going to get scanned and your information is going to be put into the computer. So the fact that the computer systems and data farms are all gathering data on us allows for the potential of our information, our specific identifiers to be out there on the web. And we want to make sure that we, always guard against that. But, sometimes you can't. So the fourth and the final category here is just, the prevalence of computers, just that computers exist, allows for certain types of computer crimes. You can see that component theft, counterfeiting, identity theft. These are all things that make up those computer crimes. So these four categories, again, going across these are very broad categories, but these are the base categories or the basics that start our investigation down into this thing that we call the computer crime. And you're looking at what we've just covered over these last 22 slides. In your book, you're going to get into a much deeper understanding of some of the things we've covered on these slides, and you're going to see how computer crime and digital investigations and digital terrorism, these are all growing fields. These are all exploding across the globe, and we are seeing where people are no longer isolated, and people are no longer safe behind their four walls of their house because they have a computer in there, and that computer allows all the criminals on the web to come into their house or into their home and exploit their children or exploit their families or steal data, things such as that. And it also gives us a false sense of reliance. People are becoming very reliant on computers, and it's unfortunate that we put so much trust into something that could not care less who we are, because computers simply don't care who we are. They're there for a specific reason. They're there to process data, and beyond that, they could care less about the human entity that's affected by the computer. So again, chapter 1, these are the slides that cover chapter 1, and I expect you to read through the chapter. The discussion questions coming from the review questions in the back. So I look forward to reading your posts on your discussions, and during our weekly get-together, we will discuss more about what I've covered here in these slides. And with that, this ends chapter 1, and we will see you in future chapters.